Hello and welcome to Web Relates. Today we're looking at the AskReddit subreddit, where Emergency Psychology has asked, what is the greatest screw it, I'll do it myself moment in history? Hero says, famous writer Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the BFG, James and the Giant Peach, etc., developed and patented a surgical device to treat children with traumatic brain injuries. Dahl had no medical training, he just did it. Dahl's 4-year-old son was injured in a car accident and developed dangerous pressure on his brain due to swelling. Surgeons installed a shunt in Dahl's son's skull to drain fluid and relieve pressure, but it kept clogging. There was no better solution on the market, so Dahl worked with a toy maker to design a new shunt that drained fluid without clogging. Dahl was able to patent the design, and it was subsequently used to treat thousands of children. Hiramunan says, John Stapp, Air Force doctor who was convinced that more pilots could survive if their seats didn't disintegrate on crash landings. He proved it by strapping himself into a Mythbusters-style rocket sled and not dying. His work led to safer planes and cars. By riding the decelerator sled, Stapp demonstrated that a human can withstand at least 46.2 G in the forward position with adequate harnessing. This is the highest known acceleration voluntarily encountered by a human, set on December 10, 1954. Stapp reached a speed of 632 miles per hour, 1,017 kilometers per hour, which broke the land speed record and made him the fastest man on Earth. Did he manage to stay conscious through that as well? Lugbor says, the man who invented the automatic switchboard. Switchboards used to require a person to physically move a cable to connect the call. He did so because his funeral home wasn't getting any customers. The lady operating the switchboard was the wife of his rival and was redirecting the calls to her husband. Instead of complaining to the phone company, which would have probably gotten her fired if they found sufficient evidence, he took matters into his own hands and made her entire job obsolete. Okay, that sounds like that belongs in Pro Revenge. Audible Nod says, Dr. Barry Marshall, for infecting himself with H. pylori to prove they were the cause of ulcers. He earned a Nobel Prize for his efforts. Seriously, go watch old TV shows and movies. There's always some guy chugging Pepto or mainlining ulcer medicine because they're 5 minutes past the deadline. Dr. Marshall killed the billion-dollar ulcer medicine industry. Emily Ashford says, Dr. Tracy Dixon Salazar, who went and got her PhD in neurobiology because her daughter was having seizures and nobody could tell her why this was happening, and nobody could treat her daughter. She found a treatment when nobody else could. Incredible woman. Nix Maritimus has replied, Martine Rothblatt was similar. Her daughter had pulmonary hypertension, blood pressure so high it damages organs, for which there was no real treatment. So she developed one, and it's still used today. Corn Throwaway says, the first guy to remove bladder stones via the urethra decided he didn't want to die. That was highly likely with the operation going through the perineum. Designed his own tool and practiced smashing up nuts in his pockets with it. Then he jammed it up his own penis and solved his own problem. I forget his name. Difficult eggplant for you has helpfully replied. Jean Saviol, 1800s. They used to insert effectively pliers through the urethra to crush the stones. Then you peed out the gravel. But there was a famous guy who used a knitting needle through his urethra to slowly grind down the stone. He did this for 6 months before finally destroying the stone. He was one of the first people to also operate on himself. 1782, Colonel Claude Martin. Impressive. Apologies for absolutely butchering the French pronunciation. Polluting has said, North Korea attempted to hack someone who used to do cybersecurity for the Department of Defense in an attempt to steal some of his hacking software. He notified the FBI, and after waiting a year for nothing to come of it, he decided to hack into servers and routers of North Korea and effectively took down their internet, as well as virtually all of their sites, for many days. Newbie97 says, in 1959, Dashrath Manji's wife died from injuries resulting from trying to cross the mountain to access the closest hospital. There was no road, so he, over the course of over 2 decades, with a hammer and chisel, moved the bloody mountain. His country, India, made a postage stamp with the mad lad's face on it. Dude swore vengeance on a damn mountain and won. Glad Document has replied, there is a movie made on him as well. He literally woke up every day for 20 plus years and went to the mountain with the hammer. It was a 55-kilometer drive from village to the closest town with facilities. It's around 15 kilometers now. I looked it up. The movie's called Manji the Mountain Man, and it's got really good ratings on IMDb. Viper Bunny has said, the woman who delivered her own baby by C-section. I guess she has several kids and knew the baby was in distress, but her husband was at the bar, so she took a shot of alcohol and delivered the baby. They all lived, even the husband. Electric Larryland has said, Wikipedia passage about the US soldier Audie Murphy at the Colmar Pocket in World War II. The Germans scored a direct hit on an M10 tank destroyer, setting it alight, forcing the crew to abandon it. Murphy ordered his men to retreat to positions in the woods, remaining alone at his post, shooting his M1 carbine and directing artillery fire via his field radio, while the Germans aimed fire directly at his position. Murphy mounted the abandoned, burning tank destroyer and began firing its 50 caliber machine gun at the advancing Germans, killing a squad crawling through a ditch towards him. For an hour, Murphy stood on the flaming tank destroyer, returning German fire from foot soldiers and advancing tanks, killing or wounding 50 Germans. He sustained a leg wound during his stand, and stopped only after he ran out of ammunition. Murphy rejoined his men, disregarding his own injury, and led them back to repel the Germans. He insisted on remaining with his men while his wounds were treated. He was 19 years old when this occurred. Not Winkman has replied, missing a big piece of info here. The Browning 50 gun was pod-mounted on the tank destroyer. However, it had a limited field of fire from the mounted position. So Murphy at points picked it up and was hip-firing a freaking Browning 50 cal, which weighs 84 pounds without ammo. Murphy was 5'5" and about 95 pounds. So, on top of being atop a burning tank destroyer and being under heavy fire and getting wounded multiple times and calling in artillery barrages, the dude went straight Super Saiyan and was pulling off superhuman feats in the process. There's a reason why he's the most highly decorated soldier in US military history, and why the dude died so young. Sworn Sword has said, English doctor Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids who had caught cowpox, a close genetic relative of smallpox with significantly reduced virulence, did not seem to catch smallpox when outbreaks would occur. As a result, he hypothesized to other physicians that infection with cowpox could be used to prevent smallpox, but they didn't buy it and essentially laughed him out of the room. Jenner proceeded to infect his gardener's 8-year-old son with cowpox and, after the boy recovered, exposed him to smallpox repeatedly, effectively demonstrating his initial hypothesis to the initially skeptical medical community. Jenner's On the Origin of the Vaccine Inoculation, wherein he published his results, set the foundation for the first smallpox vaccine and, eventually, the eradication of the disease altogether. Killing Joke has replied, in case people are wondering why Jenner had chosen James Phipps, the gardener's child, it was because he needed a subject who had not been affected by smallpox in any way in order to successfully test it. Smallpox was so common, finding people affected by pockmarks, scars left behind by the disease, was a regular occurrence. 7 out of 10 people survived the awful disease. He would have tested it on an adult if he could have found one at the time. Phipps was the only person that he could find that he knew for a certainty had not been touched by smallpox. It's insane how much of a widespread problem it was, and now it's pretty much non-existent, except for a couple of vials in disease control sites. To end on a happy note, Jenner bought a cottage for Phipps later on in his life to repay him. Phipps and his wife and kids lived there, not having to pay rent for the rest of their lives. The cottage is now a museum to Jenner, Phipps, and vaccination. DiGiorno says, Newton inventing calculus. He was trying to solve problems that were unsolvable or very tedious to solve. Instead of trying to solve them with the help of his peers, he simply invented a new branch of mathematics to solve them. And then he basically discarded his invention after he achieved his goal, because he moved on to other problems. Later, there were rumblings about a new way to solve problems, and he's like, oh yeah, I did that years ago. It's in some of my journals over there. And then he got salty about having to share credit because he never published his work. Perk Thrower says, I've told this story before, but I went to the dentist many years ago to have a rotten tooth pulled. The dentist, who was highly skilled and qualified, numbed me up, grabbed the pliers, attached them to the tooth, and pulled. Nothing happened. It didn't help that she was pretty small and simply didn't have the strength to do it. She apologized and said she'd go and get a beefier colleague, but I'd have to wait for half an hour since the other dentist was out at lunch. I said screw that, I'd do it myself. So she put the pliers over my tooth. I checked with her about 5 times that it was the correct tooth, and gave it an almighty yank. Finally, out popped the tooth. It turns out the reason it was so recalcitrant was that it had 3 roots instead of just 2. Anyway, I got a discount of £2.50 for doing the job myself. If you want something done right, probably still go to a professional. Okay everyone, thank you very much for watching. That's all we have for today. If you enjoyed, please like, comment and subscribe. And then I will be seeing you guys in the next video. Cheers!